Hello, I'm Penny Juna, and this is Fame in the Family, where we find out what it's like to have a famous parent. My guest today is James Taylor, who is the son of jazz guitarist extraordinaire Martin Taylor. James, can you explain briefly who your father is and why he's so famous?
My father, Martin Taylor, is a jazz guitar player of international repute, I suppose. His main thing really is his style of solo guitar playing, which he kind of developed and is what he's known for around the world. He's also worked with a lot of well-known musicians. He's on the classical side. He's worked with people like Bryn Terfel. On violin, he's worked with Stephane Grappelli. Bill Wyman. He's recorded on albums that included Eric Clapton and Chris Rea. Younger artists he's worked with, people like Jamie Cullum. So he's kind of gone right throughout the ages and different styles. But his main thing is being known as a great kind of jazz guitar player. When I was born, my father was 19, so he was still just he was a young dad.
And that was only 29 years ago, wasn't it?
It was, yes. It's
right.
Not that long ago. So he was at that point where he was kind of just starting to make a name for himself. He'd made that decision that he, as a guitar player, he could either continue being a kind of session guitar player where you play lots of different styles of music, or he could follow what his heart was, which was saying to him that he wanted to do jazz guitar. And, that was probably, that was in the 70s where jazz guitar wasn't, certainly wasn't the most lucrative kind of way of doing it. It was really all kind of, rock and pop guitar at that point, and a lot of people thought he was mad by going down and doing jazz guitar. So he was quite brave in making that decision and having, kind of a young baby to support and a wife to support at that point as well. And so I was born in the same place that he was, in Essex, in Harlow. But at quite an early age, he decided that he wanted a kind of change of lifestyle, so we moved to Scotland. We moved to Ayrshire at first.
And what age were you when you moved?
I was 3 when I moved up. We moved to a small kind of ex-mining village called Darmelington in Ayrshire. It's about as far away as you can get from the kind of rock and roll kind of lifestyle. It's just a very kind of quiet little village, a very close kind of community, lots of fields for a kid to play in. I think my dad, who was kind of brought up in London, and kind of a lot of our family brought up in the East End of kind of London, I think he just wanted a different kind of pace of life. My mother's from Glasgow, mm-hmm. And so I think that he just said he wanted a different kind of thing. And also for him, because he was travelling and touring so much, that he wanted a place that he could come home to, and just it could be a bit kind of quieter rather than from the kind of life on the road.
I mean, do you think he was after a normal kind of childhood for you in choosing a place like that to live?
You have to remember, he left school when he was 15 to go and work on the QE2 as a guitar player. He had to actually have the ship. He left so young that he had to have the ship's captain act as kind of guardian for him, sign off as guardian, because
wow.
And he was working with people like the Count Basie Orchestra when he was 15, and so he was in a kind of adult world at quite a young age. And in a world where you're in a different city every night, or you're playing to different audiences, and so I think he liked the idea of something a little bit more kind of settled, by coming to Scotland to do that.
Uh-huh. How did all that come about? How did he go at the age of 15 to?
Well, my grandfather was a amateur double bass player. He used to play in a lot of the kind of skiffle bands, and I suppose in the 50s. And my dad started playing guitar when he was around about 3-4 years of age, and he kind of gradually developed as a player and started to get known. He was doing kind of similar thing that I ended up doing as well. He started playing in wedding bands. The way that a lot of musicians kind of learn their trade. At that point, there was a lot more kind of jazz clubs in the UK. So he kind of built up his kind of style through that, and then he went and did what a lot of those players at that age did. He went to either play on the cruise ships, or you would go and be in the band at Butlins, and it was that kind of lifestyle. Nowadays you have kind of universities that people go to learn their craft, or they go to college. But at that point it was a kind of an apprenticeship, and you had to do what was called paying your dues. You had to go on these kind of horrible gigs, playing social work in men's clubs in Yorkshire and things. That was how you did it.
And jazz, did that just come to him because it was convenient to play jazz, or was that his love?
Well, I think that was his love. I mean, he had the decision. I mean, his older brother, my uncle, was much more into the kind of rock and pop thing. In fact, my dad went and saw Jimi Hendrix at the Royal Albert Hall when he was probably only 13, 14 years of age. So that made obviously a big impression on him. But in terms of the music that my dad grew up to love, it was people like Django Reinhardt and Stephane Grappelli, the Hot Club of France, Barney Kessel, Joe Pass, all the kind of great American kind of guitar players, and that's kind of what he really enjoyed. And he was used to, with my granddad, used to have regular kind of Sundays where you had all the local musicians used to come around the house, and they would put on a I suppose a vinyl at that point. It sounds funny now being in the world of iTunes and iPods, but they would put on a vinyl and they would listen to the music, maybe like Stephane Grappelli and Django Reinhardt, and then all 14 musicians would then kind of try and copy it. And so my dad grew up around that kind of environment. But
he then ended up playing with Stephane Grappelli, didn't he?
Yeah, it was a funny one. That, I mean, he went from loving his music to actually being in his band, and it came from a strange quirk of fate. My dad had a guitar mentor called Ike Isaacs, who was a Burmese guitar player, who ended up coming to the UK and teaching my dad guitar. And then he knew the guitar player that was working with Stephane Grappelli at that point, who ended up breaking his arm. And they needed someone to fill in, and they were looking around, and they asked my dad to play. And so my dad would have only been, I think he was around about 19 at the time. Wow. When he was asked to play. So, going from basically playing with your hero, it was a big thing. And he often tells the story, of actually kind of being in a concert hall playing with Stephane, and just kind of almost kind of stopping in his mind and just saying, remember this. This is important. You'll want to remember this, because Stephane was, he was a legend in terms of jazz music. He's one of the giants of jazz.
So, did you grow up with a guitar in your hand?
Well, no. Strangely enough, it's one of these things in our family. It tended to be either people grew up as boxers or musicians. We have in our family a history of bare-fist boxers, and because we have gypsy roots in our family.
How exotic!
Yeah. So and obviously my dad didn't want to go down that route, so he learned guitar. But I really didn't get into playing music myself until kind of late, until I was about 10, and it wasn't the guitar. It was actually the drums, because my dad he asked me to come and go with him to visit a drummer friend of his who was actually giving some drum lessons just to go and say hello. And I just said, can I have a try? The drummer himself, it was a guy called Dougie MacDonald from Ayr, was kind enough to actually offer. He said, well, I think I see something there. I'll give you free lessons for as long as you want them.
Wow.
Which was fantastic. So I ended up not playing guitar. I ended up playing drums, and also because obviously my granddad was a bass player, my father was a guitar player, so it made sense to complete the trio. Yeah, we had a band, and in fact we ended up we did some little kind of gigs and things together, the three of us, which was really nice. Playing music was my life. I would just, when I finished school, I would go into the garage at the bottom of the garden, and I would play from 4 o'clock until 9 o'clock, or whenever the neighbours got fed up. I was just obsessed with playing, and so I was very, very fortunate. And also my granddad played in a kind of big band that used to do kind of tea dances and things. Uh-huh. So even at lunchtimes, I used to, when I suppose a lot of the other kids were going to buying chips at the chip shop, I would usually run away from the school to the tea halls and actually sit in with the big band full of all these older musicians playing to people doing quick steps and foxtrots and things. Great. So it was it was an education. It was kind of following on in that tradition of kind of paying your dues as a musician. But that was I think I did my first professional gig when I was about 10.
Was your father keen that you should carry on with concentrate on your formal education, or I mean, would he have minded if you'd left school at 15 like he did and become a drummer?
He never kind of led in any particular way on it. He was obviously never keen on formal education because he had such a horrible time at school as a kid. For me, I could take it or leave it, really, school. I enjoyed some things, and I knew that at some point I'd have to kind of make a decision of whether I went into went to university or whether I went to college or maybe got involved as a professional musician. But he never really kind of said to go for any particular thing. I think the only conversation I did have with him is I actually suggested about. I got offered whether I should go to Berklee School of Music, which in Boston, to study jazz, and I thought about it. I thought this would be a great opportunity to go and study there. And I spoke to him about it, and he just said, "Well, the truth, this is from his point of view. The truth is, if you want to learn how to play music and jazz in particular, there's no point in going to university to learn it. You have to go and do it in the real world." And so I decided that if I was going to do music, I wouldn't go to university or anything to do it. But when it came to my dad helping me at school or anything, it was a bit of a waste of time because he was, he's terrible at maths. And I mean, I remember once I asked him if he could help me with a music assignment I'd been given at secondary school, and he said, well, how about we'll write a little blues together? I said, okay. So we wrote this little blues together, and I was very proud about it. This little blues number we wrote together. And I handed it into the teacher at school, and we got an F. And this is someone whose father's music's been used in films, and he's received awards and things. But I could obviously never let on to the teacher that we'd actually been a co-write.
Oh, wonderful!
So
what was his reaction?
I think he saw the funny side in it. Actually, I think he saw the funny side in it. But yeah, no, he never led me in any particular way on that one.
Did your school friends all know how famous your father was?
Not really. I mean, you would occasionally get things in the press and that you had to kind of deal with. I mean, I think at one point, I seem to remember there was a piece in the press saying that he'd had his hands insured for, I think, £1 million each or something. And it's the tabloid press, obviously, so you know the truth behind it. And I don't think my mum would ever allow him to do that because it would mean that he wouldn't be able to do washing up and things, so DIY. So, but then obviously, when kids in the playground see that, they think that that's true as well. Because he was in jazz and also because he wasn't in pop and rock, I didn't really have that kind of same problem. I mean, we have people that we work with now whose children are of that kind of same age, and they came from the more kind of pop and rock side, and I know they did go through that process, or maybe they were the parents were actors and they had that problem because they were much more in the kind of limelight.
Yeah, but maybe because it was jazz and he wasn't a rock and roll star, he remained a nicer person.
Yeah, I mean, I think as well, he's known in the business as being a nice guy.
Do you like him? Do you get on with him?
Yeah, no, he is. He's a kind of, obviously, his father and son relationship on any of these things, but
it's not always good, father and son.
No. I mean, I ended up leaving home at quite an early age as well, because I think when you get to that, the teenage years as well, there's inevitably going to be a friction between the father and the son, because you're trying to make your own way in the world as well.
Sure.
And there's always going to be that kind of slight kind of conflict. But no, I mean, he's a good bloke.
Do you remember touring with your father ever?
Yeah, I remember when I was very young. I think probably, my dad, having not been a particular fan of formal education, would just say, come on the road with me and we'll go on tour for a bit. So, when I was at my first jazz gigs when I was like 6 months old. I was taken to places like Ronnie Scott's famous jazz club in London. And now, they'd probably be done for child abuse because you're in a smoky jazz club with 6-month-old lungs. But at that point, it's a different thing. I certainly remember kind of big trips like going on tour in America when my father was touring with Stephane Grappelli. And that was great fun because it's all new. And that would have been in the, I suppose, the kind of late 70s, early 80s. So all the TV programs that I loved, like Starsky and Hutch and all these kind of things, I was going to the places where they were being filmed. I was in kind of San Francisco, and I was in Alcatraz, and going to all these places as a kid. So it was a great experience, and it's certainly one I'll remember for the rest of my life anyway.
Did you ever get on stage with your father?
Yes, but probably not in the way that I should have. I mean, there was something. I remember being in the Paul Mason vineyard in California and being asked to go up and take a birthday cake up to this old man that played piano because I think it was his 70th birthday or 80th birthday. And so I went up on stage and there was all these people looking, and what I realised now is I was Oscar Peterson that I was taking the birthday cake up to, the great jazz piano player that worked with Ella Fitzgerald and worked with loads of people. So I remember that, and I remember some of the occasions where it was a kind of mistake. I would occasionally just be watching my dad from the side of the stage and kind of walk on stage. And And I remember even in London, I think it was the Royal Festival Hall that I was in the front row watching the show with Martin. He was with Stephane, and they said, "Oh, come up on stage, And I kind of went up on stage, and I was looking at them first, and then and Stephane said, turn around, say hello to the audience. And I kind of turned around, and you kind of see these 6,000 eyes all staring at you, and you kind of suddenly get a recognition at age 3 or 4 what it's like to be on stage. And it was great.
It was great, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's great. Even what I do now, the thing I enjoy most is live, is seeing, either watching an artist perform live or being at the side of the stage and seeing one of my artists perform live to an audience and watching their faces. That's the thing that I enjoy most.
Another interest I think that you all shared, am I right, is the Marx Brothers.
Yeah, we had a Marx Brothers club where on Tuesday nights, I think, or whenever when my dad was home, because he was away so much, we needed to kind of do things, as a family. Well, I'm saying it's me, my brother, and my dad would do it together. And so we would basically get together. We'd dress up in Marx Brothers type outfits, and we would sit and watch old Marx Brothers movies on, I suppose it would be Betamax at that point. And I think at that point I was the youngest member of the Marx Brothers club. There's actually a thing you can join,
a real
one,
one,
a proper one, and I think I was the youngest member at that point. And so it was just something we kind of got into. It was, we love the humour, and I think it was that kind of bonding. It's like some fathers and sons, it'll be sport and stuff, and for us it was like movies and.
And did you have have to swear allegiance and have a password?
I think we did. Yeah, we had a password, which I think came from. I think it was the Marx Brothers film Coconuts, where they turn up at a kind of speakeasy and you have to knock on a door, and the password, if you're a Marx Brothers fan, is swordfish. And so that was our password, and we couldn't get into the Marx Brothers club, basically our living room, until we said the password swordfish. So these things take on a kind of mind of their own, really. And even now, me and my dad will still get together, and we'll say, let's go and watch a Marx Brothers movie. And so it continues.
At the age of 20, you became your father's manager. Explain how that happened and what led to it.
Well, my father had a manager, quite a good manager up until that point, but as things usually go with managers, time moves on, and I think my dad felt that he just wanted a bit of a change. And at that point, I'd left school. I'd gone on to play drums almost kind of pretty much professionally. I actually went on to college, but not to study music, to study music business, because I was always quite interested in the business side of things. And so I just kind of learned the skills about how to, manage artists, how to promote concerts and all that stuff. And then I was just kind of making my way really in trying to find my feet in the music business. And at the age of 20, my dad said, well, would you like to manage me? And so, I said yes, but there was also that thing in the back of my mind, I'm trying to break away from you as well and make my own name. And I didn't really, there was a slight thing in my head about, do I actually do this? But I just thought for the opportunity that it'd be mad not to take it up, and it would give me all the experience. And so at age 20, I started going into kind of full-time artist management. But it's funny, because if I'm speaking to, venues or promoters about him, I always refer to him as Martin. And it's, people take me up in it all the time. They say, well, that's your dad. I said, yeah, but it's, in terms of my head, I've got quite a clear distinction about the time that we spend together. We speak every day on the phone, but we're probably speaking about the business and touring and things. And I've got quite a clear distinction in my head from that. And then when we have time, really much more as kind of father and son. Was
your household sort of filled with famous people?
Yeah, but it's one of those things, you don't realise that they're famous at the time. You just it's not something that occurred. It's just, oh well, that's Bill, or that's whoever, Stephane, or whoever it is. I mean, I remember when he was doing a lot of work with Bill Wyman from the Rolling Stones, and the guitar player from Led Zeppelin had a studio down outside London, and we were standing outside the studio. And there was myself, my dad, and Bill Wyman, and I was, relatively young, and we're sitting chatting. And Bill looks out at this little kind of river running past the side of the studio, and there was all the kind of foam type stuff on it. And my dad said, that's because that's the water cleaning itself. And Bill looks up and looks at me. He said, I'll get that on my moat. And it was at that point, it's probably the only time at such an early age I kind of got a sense of, actually, there's people that are probably more well off than we are. To have your own moat as part of a castle is probably is a kind of thing. So, yeah, there was stuff like that. I think growing up or being around a lot of well-known people makes you a little bit more kind of immune to the kind of fame thing, and that comes in quite useful from a job now in terms of some of the people that I usually deal with. People like George Benson, and we now represent Deacon Blue, who was a kid. I used to lie in bed listening to my Walkman, listening to Deacon Blue, and I now stand at the side of the concerts representing them as their manager, and seeing them play to 20,000 50,000 people applauding, and that still gives me that same sense that I would have got the Royal Festival Hall when Stephane invited me up. Is still looking at and seeing people enjoy themselves, and that's what music's about.
Had you you spoke briefly and gave the impression that maybe there had been some rebellion in you during your teenage years, and that a bit of conflict.
Yeah.
How serious was that, and how did you get over that in order to come back to manage him?
I had flaming rows with my dad at times. I remember turning up once, coming home once, and I think I borrowed kind of something from the hi-fi, like a CD player or something, to use. And I think I came home one day and I found all my possessions, everything from my bedroom, on the lawn in the front garden. And no uncertain terms, you're out, get out. And so that was at age kind of 15. And at that point, I was like, okay, fine, I'm going to have to do my own thing, really. And I think in our family, people leave home quite early. I left home early. My dad left home early. My grandfather left home early. My brother left home early. You kind of go out into the world quickly.
Your brother was younger than you?
Yeah, he was 7 years younger than me.
And not interested in music?
No, I think he dabbled. He had the ability to be able to pick up pretty much any instrument and play it, which you find from a lot of people from kind of musical background, because you're surrounded by it, and that's what you could do. But he found a different thing. I can remember clearly at a very young age, he just said, "I want to be a jockey."
He went off to Australia, I think, didn't he?
Yeah. Well, he actually, another person left school early. He left when he was 15, I think, and he went to Newmarket, to the Royal Racing School in Newmarket, which was a great privilege to be able to go there. And so it started kind of developing as a jockey, and he was developing as a very good jockey. As time went on, he just took a bit of a growth spurt, and that meant that he couldn't do, I think it was the jump stuff that he couldn't do. He had to go into flat again, which he didn't enjoy as much. And he was a young boy that was growing all the time as well. And so that kind of part of his dream of being able to do that kind of racing was kind of lost. And so he decided that what he wanted to do maybe more would be learn to be a trainer. He went out to Australia. He worked out there for 6 months, loved it, came back, met a young lady in Yorkshire at the yard he was working with, and they said, "Okay, let's go back out to Australia and set up our a bit of a life together." And he said, and she was a jockey as well, so she was going to train horses as well. So they moved out there, but because he was going out for the second time, he had to go for a completely different visa, and that one took much longer. And for Stuart, suddenly being in a position where you've gone from age 15 to working every day of your life, to being stuck in a kind of apartment in a country that you don't know, surrounded by people that you don't know, that kind of led him to become quite kind of depressed, and he wasn't able to work. And we didn't really kind of know too much about this, because we were obviously kind of thousands of miles away. We were having a kind of a vacation in Vancouver, and I got a call saying Stuart's flying back to Scotland. He split up with his girlfriend. And I just kind of thought, well, okay, fine. Well, at least he's coming home. That's fine. And then maybe about 2 days later, I get a call, maybe about 5-6 a.m. in Canada, from my dad in tears, and he just told me that Stuart had killed himself. And it was just, it was just one of those, the worst moment of your life, really. My father in particular took it really badly, so it was a tough time for us. I think it was an incredibly stupid thing. I think he was absolutely wrong to do it, but I still love my brother, and you have to kind of accept that as well. And the result was, obviously, it just brings, in terms of the family, it brings you so close together because you have to cope with it as a family.
Did it alter your relationship with your father in any way?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely, for the better. Because I think we were getting to the stage, certainly my father and I, it was almost becoming like a business relationship. I would speak to him every day on the phone, but it was always about business. And we started speaking to each other as father and son again. For me, it was quite a profound kind of experience.
Are you pleased to have been your father's son?
I am pleased.
Are you proud of him?
I'm extremely proud of him.
And he presumably of you?
I think so, yeah, he occasionally says that, because I think you kind of, especially when you're working together all the time, you forget that. You have to take a step back every so often. In fact, last week we went and did some walking up in the Cairngorms together, because every so often you just need to take a step back and say, well, yes, he's an artist that's on our books, but he's also my father, and I love him as well. There's a lot we share.
James Taylor, thank you very much for talking to me.
Thank you.